So today is October 5th, 2023. We're in the middle of Student Athlete Mental Health Week. And so I wanted to make this podcast about that topic. I think it's obviously really important as somebody who works in the mental performance field. Mental health and mental performance go hand in hand. And certainly, if we don't have our mental health, it's really hard to not only perform our best on the field, but be our best selves off the field. So I wanted to talk about that. And specifically, I wanted to talk about the subject of how to ask for help. In episode 50 of the podcast, which was sort of a milestone marker for me, I talked about why it's so hard to ask for help. And I'll touch on that in this episode, but I wanted to give listeners sort of the concrete takeaways about what are some of the things they might be able to do to get better at the practice of asking for help, which is not something that most of us are really comfortable with doing and find it to be second nature. So I think I wanted to start off with a story, and the topic for the podcast in part was prompted by a conversation I had last night with my daughter, who's a 13-year-old soccer player. She's developed so well. Her confidence has increased so much on the field. She's put in so much effort and time. As a father, I'm really proud of her. As somebody who works in a field helping young athletes develop their confidence and helping them to get to where they want to go, to watch her do that with mostly of her own volition and motivation is really exciting to me. But like any young person, and she's certainly predisposed to a bit of anxiety, if you will. She's predisposed to a little bit of self-doubt and questioning herself. We were talking last night about the fact that she has three practices a week for her travel soccer team, and she's really taken to it. She really likes her teammates. She's really gotten better in a very short amount of time, just being a part of this club, which is super, super high level relative to where she was at. And she really likes her coaches, but the three practices a week that she has, one of those is going to be interrupted or interfered with because of her CCD religion class. She's going to be confirmed in the spring, and so she has to go to the class on Wednesday nights, which conflict with her practice. And there's really nothing she could do about it, right? Her mother and I are, in essence, making her go. This is something that she has to do. And quite frankly, it's a milestone that most kids her age, whether it's, you're being, Christian or Catholic or Jewish, like these milestones exist for most kids who practice in some sort of, organized religion. And so the adults in the world, the coaches and the other people understand that this is just part of like life, right? You're going to miss a practice for some other stuff that might be a higher priority, at least in the short run. And she's only 13. And so, she said to me last night, she said, Dad, I feel really bad about missing. And I feel like, coach isn't going to understand, and I hate not being there. It looks like I don't want to be there on Wednesday nights when they do their conditioning. Like, these are all really normal sort of thoughts that a young athlete might have. They don't want to be perceived as sort of cutting out on practice and like there's something more important than the team and all these things. And she was named a captain, which is she's so proud of, and I'm proud of her because of the way she performs on and off the field. And she's worried about losing that because she's not going to go to practice on Wednesday. And I just said to her, I said, one, your coach understands, right, that this is happening, right? He coaches young people. He understands that there are things that they're going to go through in their lives that are going to have to take precedence at points over the team. And you're not cutting out and you're not making excuses like this is just something you have to do. And she's like, yeah, but I feel like it doesn't look good. And I said, well, what if you talk to him about it? And she's like, I don't know. And, what's he going to say? And, how's he going to react? And I don't want to hear what he has to say. And it's weird and I'm uncomfortable. Right. So I say all that to say is like, a lot of young athletes, whether you're 13 or 15 or in college, have that block, that have that reluctance to have a conversation with a coach or someone that has influence over their development and their career about things that are hard, whether they need help with something or whether they want to make sure the coach understands where they're coming from. I think a lot of times there's just this reluctance that, hey, it's either going to be dismissed, it's going to hurt me, or it's going to be something viewed as being a weakness or a vulnerability. And so, the punchline to the story is that there really is none at this point, right? Like, I'm still working with her and talking to her about how she can go have that conversation in a respectful, productive way, and get the answers that she wants or the comfort that she wants from having the conversation so that it's not a source of anxiety, right? So I say all that to say that translates into other areas of student athletes' lives, and it translates into the development over the course of their career. And I'll get into that a little bit more. So, I'll go back to the question of why it's so hard to ask for help, just to sort of recap. And I was reading an article from Psychology Today, which is a professional trade in psychology, or a magazine or a website that I reference. I have a profile on Psychology Today for people to find me, and the article which was from last summer, mentions 3 reasons why it's so hard to ask for help. One is we don't want to be a burden. 2, we don't want to be seen as vulnerable, and 3, we make assumptions, meaning we envision a lot of times the worst case scenario. Like, what's the worst that's going to happen? We go to that, right? Because we want to protect ourselves. Our brains are wired to protect ourselves from that threat, right? Like, well, I'm not going to do this because if I do it, this is the worst thing that could happen. And a lot of it's in our imagination, but we make those assumptions and we rely on them. So I'll just, talk about each of those really quickly, right? I don't want to be a burden, right? Like, I don't want to go to my coach, or I don't want to go to my parent, or I don't want to go to a teammate and say something's wrong because I don't want to lay it on them, right? I don't want them to think that I'm weak, but I also don't want to ask for help because I don't want to, burden them. I don't want to ask for their time and their energy or feel like they don't care. So like, I'm just not going to do it. I'm going to try to solve the problem on my own. And that's really typical. Certainly that's something that I've struggled with. I struggle with all the time in terms of, do I go to somebody and ask for help? Like, is it worthy of me asking them for help? Are they going to really help me? Am I going to be seen as a pest, right? 2, I don't want to be seen as vulnerable, right? Like, there's certainly a stigma amongst athletes, student athletes, that like, if I ask for help, that it's going to be perceived as a weakness, right? That I'm not strong enough to solve my own problem, that there's something wrong with me, I'm defective. It's going to impact my playing time. It's going to impact how other people view me, right? Is someone's confidence going to wane in me because I'm asking for help, right? Is that a sign that there's something wrong with me? And certainly that's sort of tied to the last, reason why we might, we find it hard to ask for help is that, we make assumptions, right? We might assume that if I go and express the need for help, that person's going to immediately, determine that I'm weak or vulnerable or I have a defect, right? So all those 3 things are connected, and they all make sense because, again, our brains are wired to protect us from threats, right? In the evolutionary sense, it was, I'm protecting myself from, lions and tigers and, dinosaurs and whatever, right? Like those big things that are going to come and eat us and I need to get away. Now we live in a world where we don't have those same physical existential threats, but the things emotionally that we face, those are viewed as threats that are much more, dire and acute than they really are. And so our brain is trying to protect us from the hurt that comes with asking for help and being rejected, or asking for help and being told we're not good enough, or asking for help and just being ignored. All those things are threats to us. And rather than take the risk of asking for the help, we just sort of hang back and say, hey, I'll try to figure it out. How I'm going to do it on my own. But that's a lot of times counterproductive to us getting to where we want to go, right? If we keep it in the athletic context, most competitive athletes have a goal that they want to achieve, right? I want to get from high school to college is obviously a very big one. When I get to college, maybe I want to get to the Olympics or I want to get to professional sport. There are all these goals that we set for ourselves that are out of our control in a lot of instances, and they require a lot of risk taking. And that's what makes athletes so special, is that they're willing to take those risks every day and give up their time and give up their energy, give up social things, give up birthdays and travel and all this stuff to be the best they can be. And they're willing to do all that. But sometimes we hit roadblocks in that journey that we cannot get over ourselves, right? And I think for athletes, it is much more second nature to ask for help from an instructor, a coach, to work on physical things, right? I need to get better at this, technical element of my sport, or I need to get stronger. So I need a trainer or a strength coach. We are very well conditioned and comfortable with asking for that kind of help. But when it comes to asking for help that relates to our mental health or our mental performance or our emotional health, that's a lot trickier because that's not something that's as normalized. I mean, that's just the world we live in, and it's getting better. And that's part of the reason why, I have this podcast and I'm certainly doing this episode, is to shine a light on it, because it's okay to ask for help. And then knowing it's okay to ask for help, then the next question I always want to ask is, how do you ask for help? How do I ask for help in a way that's going maybe it sounds obvious, but like approaching somebody in a humble way and saying, hey, like, I really want to get better and I need your help, right? I think that that's really important. The second part is, I think a lot of times, unfortunately, when we ask for help, sometimes strings are attached, which not obviously, it makes me personally very upset, right? Like, one of the things that I look for, and we'll get to this a little bit, I think, later in the podcast, is one of the things I personally look for when I ask for help from people is I try to find the people that I know won't judge me, right? And so I would love somebody to help me in an unconditional way, because if I'm coming to them for help, then I know that I need help. Right? I'm at a point where I know I need to ask for help because I'm not going to get the change that I want if I don't do it. And if I come forward and ask for help, I don't want to be judged on that, right? I want someone to listen and say, okay, you want this help. I'm going to help you get it. Like, let's do it together. And I'm not going to question why or how or what you want out of this. I'm just here to help you out of the goodness of my heart. Frankly, that's not always realistic, right? Especially if we're going to our coach, who, we need to athletes need to put themselves in coaches' shoes. Coaches have a job to win and lose games, regardless of level, even at the high school level, certainly at college, right? So your performance is tied to their livelihood, their well-being, their success. So there's going to be a conditional relationship there by definition, right? So if you go to a coach and ask for help, if you frame it as, hey, I want help to be better so I can help our team be better, that's going to probably be received better than if I go to a coach and say, hey, coach, I want help because I want to get to college and be an athlete. And, all I care about is my performance, right? Like, they're probably not very different. But it's how you frame the request for help, I think, in terms of, hey, I want to get better so I can help everybody get better, so I can help you and I can help the team. Like that's going to go a long way in terms of, hey, this is why I need help. And so doing those things when you ask for help can go a long way to making it easier and more productive and more comfortable. And I think the other thing, I'll talk more about is, practicing asking for help, right? If we're not good at asking for help by nature and we don't do it often, we've got to force ourselves to be uncomfortable or being comfortable being uncomfortable, as they'd say, right? Like getting out of our comfort zone, which means we have to practice asking for help. And that's something I'll talk a little bit more later. So those are the three things that I would say, like when you're asking for help, those are the ways that you can be more effective in doing that. So I was in doing a little bit of research for this episode. I found an recent NCAA study, a report that came out a few months ago that says less than half of student athletes surveyed felt comfortable seeking support from a mental health provider. Now that to me is really interesting. If I contrast that statistic about asking a mental health provider to asking for help from other people in our lives that are not mental health providers, I find that to be personally somewhat surprising. And I'll tell you why. The main reason I find that surprising, and maybe student athletes don't understand this, is that asking for help from a mental health provider, it should be completely confidential, right? My work with student athletes in my coaching practice is confidential, meaning I can't share the details of what I talk to a client about with anybody else, including families. What I'm going to share some, background understanding, updates about what's going on, but I'm not going to get into the nitty-gritty details of what we talk about in our sessions, because if my clients can't feel comfortable talking about everything in a completely confidential way, they're going to hold things back, which doesn't help them. It certainly doesn't allow me to help them the way I want to help. And so confidentiality is so crucial. But if a student athlete doesn't understand that, then yeah, they're probably not going to want to go talk to a mental health provider. Further, right, I just think there's a stigma with this idea of talking to a therapist or a counselor or a psychiatrist or a psychologist, right? This idea that if I go to talk to one of those people, there's something wrong with me. And, I'll share openly. I have on the podcast. I share it in a lot of the things that I do in my work. I never went, the first time I went to go see a mental health professional was about 11 years ago when I was going through some pretty serious mental health, anxiety, personal issues. And the only reason I went is because the consequences and the ramifications in my personal life, my everyday life, were so debilitating and so troubling that I felt like I had no other choice, right? I would have opted out of that unless if I thought I could solve those problems on my own, I would have opted out. I didn't, because I was like, I just need somebody to talk to. And I did that, and I found that it was a really, really comforting and, welcoming and safe environment, right? Talking to my therapist at that time. And I had a good rapport and relationship with her off the bat, and I felt really comfortable. But then once I started that relationship, I still had anxiety issues that I was dealing with and panic attacks. And I ultimately, want to go see a psychiatrist about the prospect of being treated with medication to help, maybe address some of the challenges that I had. And, I was really reluctant, not necessarily to see the psychiatrist, because I was comfortable talking to people in the mental health setting in an office and having a conversation in a very open way. And I understood that the conversations we were having were confidential. But what I really struggled with was the idea of going on medication, because like in my mind, it was like being on medication means there's something wrong with me. I grew up in an environment where that's not something anybody would ever do. I had preconceived notions about trying medication, like what the medication was going to do to me. It was going to make me feel like a zombie. It was going to make me feel crazy. It was going to, all these things that I assumed would happen. And I resisted going on medication for the longest time until I got to the point where I couldn't sleep. I had insomnia. Like, it was really, really miserable for months on end. And I was like, okay, well, now I'm willing to give it a try. I waited till the very possible end to give it a try. And then ultimately I tried a particular medication that worked for me after some, different, trying different, types of medication. I found one that really works for me. It had limited side effects and it made me feel much better. It helped me sleep. It helped me, avoid some of the acute anxiety I was having. And I was like, oh, I'm finally glad I did this. And it took probably 3 or 4 or 5 years to get to that point. I say all that to say is like, I think there's just this stigma about talking to people in a mental health setting that we perceive to be uncomfortable and, dangerous, really. Like, I don't want to open up. And I had this experience myself, opening up completely to somebody and sharing the things that you're feeling and thinking. And some of those things are really uncomfortable sometimes. And it's like, well, if I verbalize it, then what's going to happen? Like, is it going to come true? If I verbalize it, like, is there something wrong with me? If I verbalize it, am I crazy? Like, these are all things that, I thought when I went into that process. And I'm here to tell you that going into a counseling center on campus or going to a therapist, a private therapist or a psychologist or a psychiatrist for me, it wasn't as dangerous as I perceived it to be. And I felt comfortable that I could be, treated non-judgmentally and confidentially have conversations with somebody that allowed me to like just get it off my chest. I mean, that's something I see in the work that I do with young athletes is when they determine that they can trust me as their mental performance coach and they're sharing things openly without putting a filter on it, that by virtue of doing that, they're getting a benefit. So like, I think it's important to understand that it's okay and that it's helpful and it's worth a try and not to be as intimidated by it as it might seem, right? I'm here to debunk some of those assumptions, right? So I think there are a couple more things that I would share about the practice, if you will, of asking for help. And I wrote them down, right? So what are things you can do to practice asking for help? And there are 3 things that I would share. One is, first, I would seek advice from somebody you really, really trust, right? Maybe it's a friend, a teammate, maybe it's a parent if you have that kind of relationship, whoever it is, be like, I'm thinking about doing this thing, trying this thing. What do you think? Right? If they unconditionally have your best interests at heart, you can reasonably rely on them to tell you the truth, right? Yeah, I think it's a good idea for you to do that. If you think you need help, then I support you in that. Or if you think you need help, what are you trying to accomplish, right? Why are you doing it, right? Really finding someone in your circle that you trust unconditionally to give you good advice about how to do that and just to support you in that process of going to talk to a mental health provider or a mental performance coach. Like, does that person truly have your best interest at heart? They know you're doing it. They have your back. That's one. 2, one of the things I talk about in my course, The Freshman Foundation, is, practicing asking for help, meaning like role playing it, right? Sitting down with your mental health provider, sitting down with your mental performance coach. I do that with athletes all the time. Let's role play this hard conversation about asking for help. Sitting down with a friend, like, okay, I want to go talk to my coach about my playing time or my mental health struggles or a personal situation or whatever it is, or my injury, like role playing it, right? Playing that conversation out, right? Practicing what you want to say, practicing dealing with objections or hard conversations so that when you're getting into that actual setting of having the conversation, you've prepared yourself for some of those things, just like you would prepare yourself to go out and play a game, right? You don't show up and play a game against, a good competitor without practicing, right? Without watching film, without practicing against their formation or their defense or their offense or whatever, you're going to go prepare for that. So why wouldn't you prepare for an important conversation the same way, right? We just don't think about it that way. And we don't really know how to do it a lot of times. And a lot of those times we go to ask for help or we have a conversation with somebody about, something we want to, get help with or work on, and we're not prepared, it becomes emotional. And then it becomes personal. And then it kind of backfires on us, right? We don't want those conversations to be emotional and personal. We want to be well thought out. We want to be well prepared. We want to be constructive, and we want to come out of that conversation feeling better about the conversation than feeling worse. And then finally, this is something that I think is really, really important in a lot of circumstances, is asking yourself, like, what's the worst thing that's going to happen, right? What's the worst thing that's going to happen if I go to ask somebody for help? And a lot of times that answer is the gateway, the permission to go ask for help. Because if you really think about, like, what's the worst thing that's going to happen, especially if you ask that question and have that conversation with somebody you trust, they're going to tell you, like I did with my daughter, like, what's the worst thing that's going to happen? Oh, I don't know. He's going to take away my captainship. Like, do you really think that's going to happen? I mean, I guess it's possible, right? Like, anything is possible, but he could take away your captainship or a starting role or a spot on the team. A coach can take that away from you whenever they want. It's completely out of your control. So, like, if you know that going into the conversation, really the worst thing that's going to happen is like, you may hear something that you don't want to hear. In my work with student athletes, right? They'll come to me about a conflict or a problem they're having with a coach or something that's really just bothering them. And I'll be like, well, okay, what would it be like to go talk to them about it? I don't know, and ultimately the typical reason why a student athlete, whether it's high school, college, or otherwise, wouldn't talk to a coach or somebody that has influence over their career about a problem is, like, they don't want to hear what they have to say. They don't want to hear something that's uncomfortable. They don't want to hear the truth. So rather than asking the question and getting the answer and knowing where you stand, good or bad, they'd rather just keep it to themselves. And now that leads to anxiety because we don't know what they're thinking. We don't know what they're going to do, right? Like, we're sort of at their mercy. And when I've had student athletes address coaches about issues that they've had about game decisions or playing time or coaching philosophy or programming, workouts and all those things, when they go to the coach to talk about that, when I ask them how it went, the answers vary. Great, okay, not bad, fine. But invariably, the feeling that all of those student athletes express as a result of those conversations is relief. Well, now I know where I stand, so I feel relieved. I'm not happy with what I heard necessarily, but at least I know why they did it and, like, what I need to do potentially to rectify the issue, right? These are the things that I need to go work on to put myself in a better position so that these things, these results don't happen again. Now I take back the control of the situation, knowing that I need to do these things. And I think that that's extremely important, right? To that sense of control, right? What we would call in sports psychology, the perception of autonomy, right? Like, I feel like I have agency or control over my situation, not only improves mental health, decreases anxiety, but it also increases motivation. Now I know I can do something to improve my situation, to improve my competence and my skill and my ability and my, as a player and my role on the team, right? So, like, knowing that information is really, really crucial and critical. So I think ultimately the message that I would leave, anyone listening with is it's hard to ask for help. Like, accept it. Like, don't beat yourself up. Understand why it's hard to ask for help, but know that if you don't ask for help, even though it's hard, then you're probably leaving something on the table, right? Whether it's improved performance, it's improved mental health, it's peace of mind, it's all those things, right? Like, so asking for help is a resource that you have at your disposal if you choose to access it, and knowing how to do it is going to maybe make it easier and allow you to get more out of it, right? So to go back to those things that you can do to ask for help, right? Like, be respectful when you approach someone for help. Be humble, right? Try to frame it as something that's mutually beneficial. I'm asking for help so that I can help the group, the family, the team, all those things. I can help you, coach. And the things you could do to practice that are, ask someone that you truly trust to get some guidance on how to do that, or bounce it off of them, or to have a sounding board. To role play those conversations with somebody you trust, whether it's somebody like me, a mental performance coach, a therapist, a counselor, a best friend, a teammate, somebody you really trust. Play those conversations out. Know what you want to say, know what you want to ask, be ready for objections, and preview that conversation, maybe visualize it. Put yourself in the right position, the right frame of mind to walk and knock on your coach's door, or your AD's door, or your general manager's door, or your whatever, your teacher's door, to have that conversation respectfully in an adult way, with clear reasons why you want to have it, clear objectives, and be ready for the objections that come, so that it's not emotional, it's not personal, it's about your development and the improvement of the organization. And then always ask yourself, what's the worst thing that's going to happen if I ask for help? I think that's just so critical. So I've developed the Freshman Foundation digital playbook primarily for high school student athletes who are getting ready to go to college and be an athlete, right? You're going from an environment where you might be the top dog, the star, a big fish in a small pond in high school. And now you're going to a place where you're more on equal footing with your teammates or your peers or your competitors, where you're developing new relationships with coaches and administrators in a new place away from home with new academic demands, right? In one of the modules of that course, I talk about how you can build a support network, right? Curate it, right? Meaning just intentionally developing that network. How can you get those people around you that are going to really have your best interest at heart? And one of the drills in that module, that learning module of the playbook, is practicing asking for help, right? So I've laid it out in the digital playbook for high school student athletes who want to get better at asking for help and building a good network when they get to college or before they get there, right? There's a way to do that. Like, I've formulated mental drills, if you will, that'll help you practice that before you get to college, or help you practice that when you get to college, because the content in the course applies even in that context, right? You can always go back and practice asking for help, right? So I would urge you to check the Freshman Foundation digital playbook out. You can visit michaelvhuber.com/course. Certainly there are other resources in that course that I think are extremely valuable for any student athlete, whether it's high school athlete going to college, or even a college athlete who's struggling to get the most out of their college experience. There are a lot of resources there in that course to help you. So check it out, michaelvhuber.com/course. Feel free to reach out to me on social media, Instagram @MichaelVHuber. Check out our YouTube channel @The Freshman Foundation. You can reach out to me directly at michael@ftbcoaching.com. And certainly you could check out the Freshman Foundation podcast on our YouTube channel or on Apple Podcasts or wherever you get your podcast. Again, that's the Freshman Foundation. Thank you for listening to this episode of the podcast, and we'll see you back soon. Thank you so much.